This is Kim Wehle, Simple Politics with the Honorable Jamie Raskin, member of the House of Representatives, Democrat from Maryland, and actually my representative. We live nearby, and we're also share a love of the Constitution. Professor Raskin in his prior life was a professor of constitutional law. And I just want to thank you for being here. So exciting to have you. And I want to ask you, professor to professor, right? So you just went through a lot of what I try to convey on various outlets since I've become sort of a pundit for education, frankly. A lot of the things that I like to say, what do you, if you could pick three things that you wish every American understood about our constitutional democracy, what would they be? When a third of Americans, according to the Annenberg Center, cannot name all three branches. So I mean, you're an educator.
Okay.
And we throw fastballs, right? So the slow balls, what are they?
Okay. Well, I appreciate that question, Professor Wehle. Here's the first thing that I would want everybody to understand, including my colleagues in Congress, including the Democrats, who every time Donald Trump tramples another constitutional boundary or violates the separation of powers or misspends money that's allocated for one purpose for another, they'll get up on the floor and they'll say, Mr. President, you've got to stop that. We're a co-equal branch of government. And I just want to get up and start screaming because this is such a diminution of the proper role of Congress. And I never, ever use that phrase that we're a co-equal branch of government. If we are equal branches, we are the first among equals. But even that, I think, is giving way too much away. And here's the way, Kim, that I try to explain it to people. You got the preamble of the Constitution, right? So we the people, in order for a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and preserve to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty, do hereby ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America. That's like the mission statement of the country, one big action-packed, beautiful sentence, okay? The very next sentence of the Constitution is Article 1 saying all legislative powers are vested in the Congress of the United States. So you see what happened there. The sovereign power of the American people to create the Constitution, to launch the Republic, to found the government flowed immediately into the people's representatives in Congress. And then you get 38 paragraphs that lay out every power that we've got: the power to declare war, the power to spend money, the power to govern the capital city, the seat of government, the power over piracy, the power to regulate commerce domestically, internationally, and on and on and on. And even then in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, and all other powers necessary and proper to the execution of the foregoing powers. Then after all of that, you get to Article 2, right? All executive powers vested in the President of the United States. 4 short paragraphs. The 4th paragraph is all about impeachment, okay? So how you impeach a president for committing treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the rest of it is commander-in-chief, not of the country, not of the government, but commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy and the state militias when called into actual service. And then what's the president's job? It's true that he or she can veto legislation coming from Congress, but he can be overridden by 2/3. So the final word is with Congress. The basic core of the job is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And remember, the president didn't even exist in the Articles of Confederation. It was put in as an afterthought saying we need someone to keep things going when we're not here and to have energetic enforcement of the laws and so on. But the whole image that people have right now of a quasi-king, a monarch who presides over the whole government, and everybody is subordinate to him, and the president is giving us the finger when we are asking for information that we need in order to legislate and govern, is just preposterous. So some of it has been given away by Congress over the years, and then some of it has been stolen by the president, but we need to rewrite the balance and end this imperial runaway executive power.
Yeah, well, how do you do that? Because, the Senate, without actually have any witnesses, and the word, the notion of trial appears twice in the Constitution. So it's not like the framers didn't understand what a trial and evidence was. Impeached him on, or refused to convict him on, abuse of Congress. So Congress is essentially saying, you can railroad us all you want. So I think how much is Congress to blame for enlarging the belt and suspenders of the presidency, and how do you get that back once the horse
Well,
is out of the barn?
well, the founders believed, like if you read Federalist 10 by Madison, they believed that, you would have, you know, counter ambitions, right? Offsetting ambitions, and that the ambitions of the individual leaders and legislators would be identified with their branch or chamber of the government. But in fact, that has been supplanted by partisan government and partisan identification. And today, it's gone to a real extreme where, I think that our friends across the aisle are not even behaving like a political party where there's critical thinking and debate, but like a religious cult. I mean, and you can see that with the masking thing. I mean, if Donald Trump, he decided that masking was terrible and awful, and he was going to mock people who wear masks, like Joe Biden. He's going to make fun of people. He's going to undercut the masking rules. He's going to deputize Attorney General Barr to go and try to sue against the public health orders that include social distancing and masking in Michigan and Virginia, and so on, right? But imagine if so all of his followers, they also don't wear masks, and they, uh, denounce people for mask rules and punch people in stores who ask them to put a mask on and all that crazy stuff. But imagine if the president had said something different. What if he'd said, hey, we've been invaded by China with this China virus, and everybody's got to put one of these Patriot masks on.
Or
and you got to
a
wear
MAGA mask, a MAGA mask.
then they would all be wearing them all the time, and they'd be beating people up who don't have a mask on. And instead of beating up people who ask them to put one on. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that is cultish thinking. There's been a total demolition of critical thought within the Republican Party. They just followed the leader. It's terrifying what's going on.
Well, it's one thing, the populists, and as you know, the framers were worried about populism, which is why we have a representative government. But what's happened to the members of Congress? What's happened to Congress itself? I mean, because I agree with you, Congress has to give out tickets for speeding in the White House. It's not happening. We have this imperial presidency, and I seem to think, and other constitutional scholars would agree, democracy's on the ballot this now because we're voting now. And 4 more years of Trump, it's an experiment that is in the history books in a footnote. We have some other government, not a democracy anymore. That is literally on the ballot. And all of these years that the last few years I've been doing this punditry, the question has always come up, where's the line that Republicans, elected officials, will draw? It's one thing when the populace listens to Fox News, when the populace believes false information. What about elected members of Congress?
But I mean, a lot of them have drawn the line, but they're no longer Republicans. I mean, they're in the Lincoln Project, or they've gotten out. I mean, my 2018 Republican opponent, a very thoughtful guy who ran against me named John Walsh, has endorsed me this time. He said he can't take it anymore. And a lot of Republicans have gotten out, but the ones who are in it have essentially sold their souls to the Trump family. I mean, they basically have said, we will go along with whatever you say. There's no debate.
Though? Is that power? Is that because I agree with you? There's this coalition of moderate network. I write for the Bulwark and Charlie Sykes and Bill Kristol, and and they just had James Carville do a piece. And there's kind of this coalition of moderates from both parties. But why? Why have they checked their humanity at the door?
Well, I mean, that calls on skills I don't have, because it's not really so much about political philosophy or constitutional law. That really is about social psychology and how you get wrapped up in a kind of groupthink, and you have a desire for submission to authority. And there's almost like a sadomasochistic relationship. I mean, to see Donald Trump, who has absolute contempt for the people who come to his rallies, like Howard Stern said, I saw an interview with him. He said he would never have one of those people over to his house or to his party or the White House ever, right? And yet they worship him, they hang on his every word, and they do whatever he says. And he has contempt for them and brings them together in these super spreader events. And there was a super spreader event yesterday, I think, in Florida, where not only was no one wearing masks and there was no social distancing, but it was like 95 degrees and a dozen people passed out, and they're carrying people out in stretchers. I mean, like
Right,
that's on the road.
Omaha, they were, they had hypothermia, right? Because they were abandoned during a rally and they didn't have transportation back to their cars.
Right.
So
Anyway, so I guess the second thing I would say is, all right, so understand, like, forget the co-equal powers. Congress has got to be preeminent. But here's another thing. The presidency cannot be a money-making operation. The founders designed the Constitution in such a way that it could not become an instrument for self-enrichment. I mean, America's a great country. You can go out and try to get rich in a whole bunch of different ways, but not being president of the United States, you are not allowed to accept any presents, emoluments, which means payments, offices or titles from any foreign government, prince or king, without the explicit consent of Congress. And it's never really been allowed before. I mean,
well, but that's the
Lincoln,
question though. Where's Congress in enforcing that?
okay, well, there, all I can say is that is our fault. I've been fighting for it from the beginning, but I hope in the lame duck period, we finally will pass this resolution I have, a resolution of disapproval for every foreign government emolument pocketed by Donald Trump, as well as every domestic emolument unlawfully accepted by Trump, because there's a separate part of the Constitution which says the president may have a salary in office which may not be raised by Congress during his term of office, and no other emolument from the United States government. And yet, every time they go down to Mar-a-Lago or they go to the golf course at Bedford in New Jersey, or they go to Ireland or Scotland, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of taxpayer money out the door for the hotel rooms and the fancy steak dinners and the martinis and the golf carts and you name it, for the Secret Service and the FBI and the State Department and so on. I mean, it's absolutely criminal what is taking place. So I have always felt, and I've been honest with this about my colleagues and with the leadership, I've always felt that the impeachment should have included those basic levels of corruption, which I think are the original sin of the Trump administration. And the cardinal rule of the Constitution is you can't go in and begin to loot the taxpayers or use your power over the national government of the United States to take money from foreign states, compromising your fiduciary duty to the people.
Yeah, I know. And I want to break that down. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, but just for who's watching, why? Because we've seen this for 4 years. Can you explain why is that bad? Why did the founders not want that?
I mean, the founders rebelled against monarchs who technically owned all the property in the government when they were there. They could take from it whatever they wanted. And, again, a president was added late to our constitutional scheme. We wanted basically government of we the people and our representatives. And people distrusted and mistrusted a president who could become very quickly an aspiring monarch, right? But the theory is that the president was just an employee. All of us who aspire and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people, not the masters of the people, but the servants of the people. It's a principal agent relationship. We are the agents of the people out trying to make particular things happen, not a king who says, okay, now I'm the monarch and I can have whatever I want.
So I want to throw in a couple terms that as a former law professor, and obviously still an ongoing constitutional mind, will understand, but they've made their way into the public consciousness in a way I think that is quite distorted. But somehow people are voting on these theoretical terms. One is the Unitary Executive, that somehow that justifies this massive power. It started, I think, to take hold during the Bush II administration and the torture memos, this notion that during the time of a invasion, or if we're in a war on terror, there's unlimited power. Our colleague John Yoo at University of Berkeley was in the Office of Legal Counsel and still kind of has that position, but we've taken that afar. That's number one. Number two is, and we saw this last week with Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings, originalism / textualism, right? Both of those constitutional concepts. And I'm wondering, can you explain what those really are and why if you agree with me, they've been hijacked a little bit in a way that regular people think they understand?
Well, first of all, the terms originalism and textualism are deployed completely selectively and manipulatively by the conservatives to mean whatever they want them to mean. I mean, take Citizens United, where the Supreme Court transformed every corporate treasury in America into a political slush fund for the CEO. Corporations don't appear textually in the Constitution, nor was it anybody's original contemplation that corporations would come to enjoy the political rights of the people. In fact, in the Dartmouth College versus Woodward case in 1817, I think it was, Chief Justice John Marshall said, a corporation is an artificial entity, invisible, intangible, existing only in contemplation of law and not possessing the constitutional rights of the people. The Roberts Court turned that completely on its head 2 centuries later and said, oh no, you can't keep corporations out of politics. It had always been understood, including by very conservative justices like White and Rehnquist, that corporations enjoyed no political rights. They're an economic instrument set up very effectively to amass wealth and to invest and to compete.
Constrain liability too, right?
But yeah, but in fact, Rehnquist said, you know, there are very special dangers that the private corporation poses in the public realm. Justice White said in First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti that the corporation is the creature of the state, and the state need not permit its creature to devour it. But now you've got the conservative majority on the court for whom Citizens United is absolute religious dogma. It's not based in any originalism. It's not based in any textualism. It's just made up. And that's why it's a lot cleaner to think of them as just a corporate court. They're there to advance the power of large corporations and wealth and concentrated political power too in the Republican Party over everybody else. So I think it's phony. But look, I think textualism is both true and banal and obvious. Everybody starts with the text of the Constitution. We must, and I think that the original understanding and meaning of the language is also a great starting point. You know, most serious lawyers don't disregard precedent, and they don't disregard the structure of the Constitution and the values of the Constitution and so on. But I mean, nothing's more maddening than watching them get up on TV and say, you know, we are the textualists, we are the originalists.
Well,
I mean,
and that there's one black and white way of reading it. We do that. We don't inject our political, ideological, personal, subjective points of view. It's just the progressive judges that do that. We color in the lines. They don't.
Yeah.
And then now we've got, you know, we have, and I want to ask you, if you're worried, like I am, about this conservative court, and you mentioned Citizens United, which allowed unlimited amounts of corporate and billionaire dollars into our elections, where you and I have limits on what, as regular citizens, we can give to any particular candidate under federal law, on the idea that we don't want to bribe candidates. So we have Citizens United. You also mentioned Shelby County, which gutted Section 5, a critical part of the Voting Rights Act, which was designed to basically implement the amendments to the Constitution to make access to the ballot box okay. Then last year we had Rucho versus Common Cause, where the court took, you know, a completely made up doctrine, the political question doctrine. It's nowhere in the Constitution to say, okay, even if this is unconstitutional to allow political gerrymandering, we're out. You can't come to the courts. Kitchen's closed. I don't care who you find. Gone fishing, never, we're out. You've got to go to gerrymandered politicians to fix that gerrymandering problem. So this is my worry. You have these great, you know, I have this list in front of me of, and you know, of the kinds of legislation that you've introduced, that you're talking about to fix our system. I'm concerned that people talk about abortion with this court, that maybe there will be HR 1 or HR 4 will come through, amendments, fixing, doing some stuff with the electoral system, the voting rights, and it'll get to this Supreme Court and they'll strike it down.
Well, you know, we're living in a period of intense right-wing judicial activism. I mean, the 2 cases we just mentioned, Shelby County versus Holder, where the Supreme Court basically invented an equal protection right for states, that states couldn't be treated differently under the Equal Protection Clause or under just due process or just free-floating structural feelings that they have. totally a breathtaking act of judicial activism to strike it down, to gut the Voting Rights Act, which goes right to the heart of democracy. And the same thing in Citizens United, where they invented a constitutional right of corporations to spend to the heavens, all in the name of the shareholders, who already have their own right to spend money in politics and give money. And the shareholders don't know anything about even what the CEOs are doing with politics. So I do have legislation called Shareholders United saying, all right, if the corporations are going to be spending all this money in politics, they shouldn't be able to spend any of it until they've had a prior majority vote of the shareholders to say that they want their money spent in that way, if that's the basis for the decision. But your point is exactly right. We're facing a Supreme Court that is poised to strike down lots of legislation that we need to address the converging crises of America in terms of COVID-19, opioid, gun violence, climate change, and so on. And you could see very much Mitch McConnell making the political bargain in his mind. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll ram this judicial nomination through, despite the fact that it contradicts everything that we said 4 years ago when they kept my constituent, Merrick Garland, from even getting a hearing when he was nominated in February. And here's Barrett being put on the court at the end of October and having a hearing in October. But
and he was quite moderate. I've appeared before him. I mean, he's not a zealot that I think some people think she is, but yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I think that it's a very serious problem, and we're going to have to try and deal with that. You know, the Republican Party has lost the popular vote in 5 of the 6 last elections, and yet controls the Supreme Court 6-3. And there's something profoundly wrong with that. And McConnell made the calculation, you know what, we're going to irritate and antagonize everybody. We don't care. We'll lose Congress, we'll lose the White House, but we got the Supreme Court there as a backstop to just savage all the legislation, from the Affordable Care Act to the Voting Rights Act to Clean Air Act, Clean Water, what have you.
Like we saw after post New Deal, which was the first time that FDR considered enlarging the scope of the court. Of course, Congress, people need to understand, is the one that would make that change to the configuration of the court. And it's not a unilateral thing that the president would do. But this isn't the first time in American history that widespread changes have been pushed. There's been pushback to big social reform. So what do we do? Do you have a view on?
I don't have any defined view at this point, other than we need to have the conversation.
I agree.
We need to be as historically sensitive and as constitutionally grounded and as politically subtle as we can be moving forward. Because we did see what it did with Franklin D. Roosevelt. It was an enormous drain of his political capital to put it out there, and the Republicans effectively cornered the market on the language of court packing. I mean, they were in the middle of court packing, having packed the district courts, the appeals courts, and they were in the middle of jamming this nomination through for the Supreme Court. And they had the temerity and the gall to turn around and start lecturing us about hypothetical court packing in the future, assuming their nominee got through, assuming we won the presidency, assuming we won the Senate, assuming we had hearings on it and we went through. I mean, it was absurd, but
it's court unpacking, really. It's unpacking the court. And my concern is with the delegitimizing of the institutional independence of the court itself. And my issue with Shelby County is what we're going to see on the 10th. In fact, with the ACA, we're seeing, just so people understand, questions are coming through the federal courts relating to changing the voting laws state by state in the midst of a pandemic. Conservatives are essentially saying, oh no, only state legislatures can do that. Other branches of government cannot, or actors in government. That's kind of this emerging theory in the voting rights cases. But then when it comes to congressional legislation, my problem with that is striking down. I mean, the Shelby County, the Voting Rights Act, that had widespread bipartisan, it was reenacted multiple times with massive majorities in the Senate. There was a huge record below, and the court said, no, we need more. To me, that seems like infringing, the court infringing on the prerogative of Congress, that there should be such a high threshold to striking down acts of Congress. It shouldn't turn on constitutional approaches to interpretation, and what the public
Yeah.
meaning was.
I mean, it was outrageous judicial activism, and all of it in service of just an ideology of exhaustion with racial things, saying this has gone on long enough. And, there's no real problems in the South. You can't show us that there have been any efforts by states to discriminate. And Justice Ginsburg, issued the ultimate rejoinder to that, just saying it's like being in the middle of a thunderstorm with an umbrella, and you say, "Oh, I'm not getting wet. I'm going to take my umbrella down." I mean, we're talking about centuries of disenfranchisement and discrimination against voters. The Voting Rights Act and the pre-clearance requirement, which said that states and jurisdictions had to pre-submit any changes affecting the rights of voters to the Department of Justice to make sure that they didn't have a disproportionate racial impact. That it was unconstitutional to do that based on the formula that Congress was using.
Right.
That's what they did, and again, not based in the text, not based in any original theory, and based on a really muscular act of the Supreme Court reaching out to strike down the law of Congress. So just don't take any of the nonsense about how they're sort of in a conservative restraint and textualism and originalism nonsense.
I mean, you'll see though on Twitter, someone will put out a tweet, "Why are you voting for Donald Trump?" And hundreds or thousands saying originalism, originalism, originalism. It's just astonishing to me.
Yeah.
And what I say is judges judge. That's why they're called judges. There's always discretion, and somehow we've gotten this in to the public consciousness that somehow that makes you a bad judge if you exercise judgment in making hard decisions. I want to.
Well, they don't exercise judgment. They just follow whatever the Federalist Society dogma is. I mean, you look at that opinion written by Justice Kavanaugh this week. It was appalling. It was like it had been dictated by Donald Trump.
Well, I was stunned. I was stunned with the errors. I mean, I worked with him in Whitewater. He's a very, very smart lawyer. I mean, extraordinary, very, very careful. And I thought that was unfortunate. I want to ask you about the Electoral Account Act, and so people want to know, I mean, as I'm sure you know much better than I, with all your constituents and where you are, there's massive anxiety right now. I mean, people are so stressed. This is next week is, people are feeling it in their throats, right? What do you think is going to happen? And what happens if this goes into Congress, right? If there's a contested election and it gets thrown to Congress and we have this statute called the Electoral Account Act that kicks in?
All right. Well, the good news is that if the polls are correct and there's going to be a landslide election for Biden-Harris, then there's really not very much that they can do. It's not like a Florida 2000 situation where you had a whole election that came down to one state, and then within that state, it was extremely close, and it was subject to a judicial intervention to stop the counting of ballots and to freeze the result. And I think it was utterly fraudulent. I wrote a book about that called Overruling Democracy. But in any event, I don't think that we're going to have a replay of that factual scenario. So we're looking at far more extreme kinds of things, either an invitation to the federal courts and the Supreme Court to get involved to just lop off whole categories of ballots coming in, like every ballot that was cast by mail, or every ballot that arrived after Election Day, even in a state which allows them to arrive after Election Day if they were cast and mailed before. But they'll look to see if there can be categorical exclusions. But even there, it looks like Biden will probably be ahead in every category. And in any event, you would have to somehow reproduce that scenario over 5 or 6 states in order to make a difference. So I'm not really seeing a successful judicial route there. It's not to say that they won't go to court, because they may go to court. It may even get up to the Supremes, but it's hard for me to see how that becomes determinative if, in fact, we've got millions votes of margin between the two candidates. Now, then the real danger is that that GOP legislatures follow the invitation and the urging of Donald Trump to disregard the popular vote in a swing state, say Pennsylvania, where Biden could get 1 million votes more. He's very popular in Pennsylvania, but just nullify the popular result, repeal the existing state election law, pass a new statute that just appoints the electors for Trump or splits them 50-50 or comes up with some other allocation. The claim there would be, well, we've got the power under Article 2 of the Constitution to decide the manner of appointment of electors, and we're going to do that in this way. Our power is absolute and it's plenary.
Which
There's
the court which the conservative court would probably uphold. Yeah.
A number of conservatives are trending in that direction, but there are a lot of problems in it when you really start to look at it. For one thing, the election statute that they're going to be invalidating is one that was adopted under the state constitutional system, which means it was signed into law by the governor. So this state election law should be signed into law by the governor, but now they're purporting to act unilaterally under Article 2 of the Constitution, which has never happened before. They're saying, well, we're just a free-floating constitutional actor. It's certainly not Congress's view of it. In the Electoral Account Act of 1887, Congress said, and this has been the law for more than a century now, that we will treat as presumptively the electors sent by your state those that are cast by the state as long as they are in accord with a pre-existing state election law. In other words, Congress acted to preclude precisely what it is these Republican legislators are talking about doing, which is just spoiling the entire electoral process as it's taken place and just voting for new people. And I think that, who knows what happens if it gets up to the Supremes, but other federal courts would just say, wait a second, the election's already taken place under the law that you passed under the Electoral Account Act. The legislature has already acted. You're purporting to meet in session that hasn't been approved and to act without the governor's signature or veto. That's very weird,
Well, what is that then December 8th date therefore in the statute then, right? Where it says 8 days prior, and this came up in Bush versus Gore. If the legislature does want to change, what in your view then saves that language? What is that for if it's not for allowing the legislature to change the law? You're saying it would have to go through the governor signing it into law for that to be amended.
Yeah, you have to comply with the state electoral system. I mean, remember what Article 2 says is not the legislature can do whatever it wants. It says each state shall appoint, in a manner decided by the state legislature, a number of electors equal. So it's the state itself. And I think that Arizona case relating to the power of the people to set up an independent redistricting panel over the legislature's decision supports that concept. I mean, the state legislature is a product of the state constitutional system, and the state itself is larger than the legislature. So, but I think there could definitely be a showdown over that issue. But okay, even if everything goes the Republican way on that, now it comes to Congress on January the 6th under the Electoral Account Act. The president of the Senate, who's the vice president of the United States, Mike Pence, then say he has 2 slates of electors from Pennsylvania, for example. Okay, one sent by the legislature saying this is the new slate that's been approved by the new electoral law, by the legislature under the new electoral law. And then there's one that's been ratified by the Secretary of State, who's a Democrat in PA, and the governor, who's a Democrat in Pennsylvania. And so we've got rival slates. Well, Pence will say, well, let's take the Republican one up. This looks good to me. I'm going to count these. We in the House have a right to object. We say we object, and we file a written submission explaining what's wrong with their approach. The Senate, if it's controlled by Democrats, would undoubtedly come along with us. But even if it's still controlled by Republicans, all we need is one senator to join with us. At the point at which there's a bicameral objection, the House and the Senate each resolve into their own chamber to discuss the objection. The House would come back and say, we reject that counterfeit slate of electors. If the Democrats control the Senate, they would agree with us. If the House and Senate agree, that's controlling. That's determinative under the Electoral Account Act. If it's, say, Republican controlled, they disagree, and now we're at odds with each other. At that point, Congress is supposed to be bound by the certificate of ascertainment issued by the governor of the state in question. The Democratic governor of Pennsylvania would almost certainly say it is the winner who comes out of the popular vote that has been, invalidated for artificial reasons by the legislature. And we think that we would be bound by the certificate of ascertainment. It turns out that there are Democratic governors in every swing state that the Republicans control the legislature in. So the Democrats could be the Democratic governor could be the backstop under the Electoral Account Act in every state, except for Florida, where the GOP controls the state house, the state senate, the secretary of state, the governor, and the attorney general. So Florida, as usual, is going to be a danger zone for us because we could win it, but you could get a lot of hanky-panky and mischief by a state legislature. And at that point, all of the arguments we were discussing before are going to come into play.
So the delaying counting the ballots, mucking up counting the ballots in swing states, that is what gets us into trouble potentially, because then you could have the state legislature come in early December and say, well, we don't have a count, so we're going to do it our way. Number two, it seems like what you're saying is if the Senate changes, if that were to happen, but the Senate were to go to Democratic hands, we'd probably be okay. We, the people, I say, I mean, not as a
Yes.
president, we'd probably be okay, because then you'd have basically the Congress agree on going with the popular vote.
The popular vote, exactly.
Right. And then, so the threshold question I have, because I'm just trying to, for non-lawyers watching, just trying to sort of streamline kind of touch points, then it seems to me, so it's the Senate. The other question is, which are the states, right? So we've got Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all of which have Democrats, right?
Yes.
But Republican legislatures. Florida, a lot of pundits are saying Florida, 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 and Florida counts their ballots on the earlier side, unlike those other states that it takes longer, so we wouldn't know. Do you agree that if Florida goes clearly for Biden early on, that the election is less likely to drag out because there's not a pathway for Trump?
Well, yeah, I mean, the studies I've seen on that suggest the electoral college arithmetic is such that there's basically no way for Trump to get there without Florida. And, the numbers are just overwhelming at that point for Biden. I mean, of course, Biden doesn't need Florida in that sense, but it would be nice to have that clarity early. I mean, everybody knows what's going to happen. Donald Trump around 10 or 10:30 is going to say, I won. Stop counting the ballots. It's midnight. It's a new Cinderella rule. You got to stop counting ballots at midnight. There's not a single state in America that is the rule that you stop counting ballots at midnight. The rule is you count all the ballots.
Right.
I mean, let's not let people lose their heads. We know what an election is. An election is the people vote, the votes come in, you receive all the ballots, and then you count all the ballots. That's what it is. We've done this through the Civil War, through the Great Depression, through World War I. Don't let Donald Trump get everybody all flummoxed. I've actually been a little cheered, Kim, over the last few days that he seems to be touching ground a little bit in terms of reality when he says, well, I could lose to the worst candidate of all time. I might lose. He's actually beginning to reckon with that as a possibility, because all the rhetoric before was, there's no way I can lose unless they're stealing it from me. The only way I can lose is with fraud and so on. That's really dangerous rhetoric, obviously.
Well, and the other danger, and you mentioned guns and gun legislation, the Second Amendment, and some of us were horrified with the Lafayette Square display of using federal anonymous, non-identified. I was shocked to do the research, and there's no federal law requiring identification for officers that are actually administering sort of police authority in public, but the use of federal force against peaceful demonstrators and the media. Right, one woman literally lost her eye in that connection. So
nine people, by the way, lost their eyes in the protests in the summer. 9 people lost eyes.
Do you worry about, this again is social psychology or psychologists, that Donald Trump, many professionals, not my area, have said he's got a severe personality disorder. So the question as to whether he can actually ever give up, I don't know, that's for that profession. But there is talk of violence, potentially violence. And of course we have guns galore in America. Are you worried about that? I mean,
look, I mean, I'm always worried about it. I mean, I've lost a lot of constituents to gun violence. And I mean, as you know, we've got the worst gun violence of any advanced democracy on earth. And there's been a lot of violent rhetoric in this campaign, and the president has talked about creating Trump's army of people to go out at the polls. I know my friends in the Michigan delegation are concerned because the alleged criminal conspiracy to kidnap and assassinate Governor Whitmer took place in Michigan and in my friend Alyssa Slotkin's district. They live in her district, and they've got an open carry law, and the right-wing groups are openly calling for people to go to the polls carrying guns. Now, they're theoretically going to just intimidate people, which is bad enough, but who knows what happens when words are exchanged. But even that nightmare scenario doesn't necessarily impair the counting of the ballots or the votes. I mean, that's a separate problem. That's gun violence and white supremacy and violent extremism in America, which, by the way, the Secretary of Homeland Security said in a recent report is the #1 terror threat in America. It's not Al-Qaeda, it's not ISIS, it's violent white supremacists. And of course that's true. We know that from the Tree of Life Synagogue, and we know that from Charleston, South Carolina, and the Walmart in El Paso, and gun massacre after gun massacre, we know where it's coming from. So yeah, I'm worried about it. And I mean, it's stressful to think that we have gone that far down the road towards becoming a failed state, that election day is going to become a dangerous thing for people. And I just hope cooler heads will prevail and that somebody will begin to get Trump to dial down the rhetoric.
And we also do have, longstanding public servants that are positioned to enforce order. I mean, I think the question becomes who will they answer to, but if they've got a vice president-elect, there are serious people in government that really care about serving the public. And I think we need to remember that. Well, I know we've taken up so much of your time, but I want to try to end on a positive note. I was with Bill Kristol, did a talk to a group of administrators of public universities. They represent 70 million people, or huge numbers. I mean, maybe 70,000. I'm probably exaggerating, but huge numbers of students. And he was saying Bill was saying this is a tremendous time in politics because there's so much opportunity if we kind of make it through the next few months. Would you agree with that? And
I totally agree with that.
And as someone who, went from academia to now you're a state representative and now in federal, what's your call to the next generation, these 18 to 26-year-olds that are voting en masse, that I talk to all the time, that a few months ago thought their vote didn't matter, now they do?
Yeah.
What's your call to them?
I mean, first of all, I've got kids in that age group, in the college age, in the 20s, and I think you do too.
Yep, I do.
Kim, and it's a magnificent generation that really has gotten beyond racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny and sexism. And I mean, unfortunately, they've gotten a little bit beyond grammar too. And a lot of that is technology. I hope that they will work on their writing skills. But no, I'm very taken with this young generation. And I think that they've got a tremendous sense of public purpose and activism, and they've gotten into it. And these are young people who've grown up in the shadow of Trumpism and extremism and everything, and they understand democracy is not something you take for granted, and that that all of us voting and participating and reading the news and talking about what's going on is part of the rent we pay for getting to live in a democratic society, and you can't leave it to other people to do it. No, you can't be a free rider. You've got to, be a participant yourself. So we've come through some really hard times and some really dark and gloomy times, but we are still here. And we are seeing robust majorities of people who want their country back. That is going to be an amazing feeling, knock on wood, fingers crossed, if we can actually make that happen. And I think that Bill Kristol's right about that point. It's a remarkable moment of opportunity for young people because the needs are so overwhelming.
And you can make a difference, right? You can get into politics and actually, implement or be part of implementing some changes that I think if it had been Hillary Clinton, who was president the last 4 years, I don't know. I mean, we're in such a dark crevasse that it's almost like post Watergate. We saw so much reform. We can maybe really move things in a way that there's energy to do it that there would not have been if we had.
We're going to have to get off of the road to being a failed state and get back on the road of democratic reconstruction. And that means addressing the real needs of the people, which means we're going to need hundreds of thousands of bright, engaged young people to deal with COVID-19 as contact tracers and testers, and hundreds of thousands to deal with the nightmare of climate change. And we're going to need, environmental Green Corps members all over America involved in rebuilding the infrastructure of the country in a way that advances our environmental goals rather than undercuts our environmental goals. And all of these problems, the economic collapse, the problems we've got in education now, they call on the idealism and the activism and the skills of young people. So I think it's again, knock on wood, if we get through this the right way, it's going to be an amazing moment to be involved in the reconstruction of our country. And so I would leave people with the words of two of my favorites I've kept close to my heart, Kim, during this period. One is Frederick Douglass, the great Marylander, who was born into slavery in the 19th century and escaped to freedom and became our great freedom fighter and abolitionist. And he said that if there's no struggle, there's no progress. The struggle may be moral, it may be physical, it may be moral and physical, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. And finally, I've kept close in my heart Tom Paine, who came over to be with us in the revolution against the kings and the queens and the tyrants and the kleptocrats and the theocrats and everything. And Paine wrote this pamphlet in 1776 called The Crisis. And in it, he said, I'm going to update the language a little bit so it doesn't offend modern sensibilities, as Speaker Pelosi always urges me to do. But he said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. These are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country. But everyone who stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end is our victory. So I really do believe that victory is going to be ours just in a few days.
Yeah, and I think we know that from our own lives too. It's the hard stuff that makes us grow and makes us, serve grace in a way. And anyway, well, thank you for your time, Congressman. This has been really an educational moment for me and really terrific. And I can't wait to share it with people. And I hope we can have a conversation afterwards, looking back when we get into the light, so to speak. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor Wehle, and thank you for bringing the Constitution, our beloved Constitution, to the people and translating for everybody.
Well, I enjoy it. It's a privilege. It's a privilege and an honor. So have a great evening. Thank you again.